What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy, that's Joe, and this is the Race Day Rundown. Got a few little updates for you guys this week. We're making a few little tweaks to some things going forward once the playoffs start. We also want to tell you about our contest. Joe, do you want to kind of fill them in on everything we got going on?
Yeah, if you would like to get in on our free weekly contest, drop your DraftKings tag down below. It's fun, it's free. We have a lot of weekly contestants, and you'll be added to that weekly invite list. So make sure you get in on that. Also, we've got Jeremy and I have been talking about adding to our DK impact scores. We're going to add a decimal point and make sure that we are giving you our full thoughts, because Jeremy and I might have variations on where we land giving someone an 8. He might be a strong 8. I might be a little bit less of a impact there. So we want to be able to differentiate a little bit more. And thanks to your feedback as well, we've got some people that think that that would be an addition to what we're doing here. And also, since the playoffs are here, we've already provided a lot of race content for you throughout this year. At this point, moving forward after Daytona, starting next week for the playoffs, we're going to put all of our content behind the paywall. That's the race guide and garage thoughts. All these videos obviously are on YouTube, so you get to check them out. But there's a lot of benefits for being a Patreon member. We've seen a lot of you become members already. So go take advantage of some of the discounted rates, the early season offers that are still out there for the taking. So definitely appreciate all the support there. But yeah, man, we've got a lot of action-packed stuff to happen here at Daytona. We talked a lot about it in our podcast. Strategy is key, I think, this week for sure, because stack the back is where we're at.
Yeah, once we get into the drivers, you're gonna know if you've been watching our videos for the last few weeks or for any time at all, you know how we do our impact score. It is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being obviously the best, the most impact on the DK slate. You know, we kind of take a lot of different metrics that kind of roll into a single number. One obviously is kind of a really don't play. I mean, the likelihood of him winning you money that particular week is almost zero. So if you are familiar with that, you kind of know, okay, well, these drivers are going to be on the higher end. These drivers are going to be on the lower end. Well, this week is quite a bit different. Um, and there's going to be some explaining to do. We'll get into that in a second. Um, but that's kind of how this rating system works. But I want to just take a couple minutes here and just tell you about how this race is shaping up. It is a 400-mile event versus the 500, the classic Daytona 500. It means there's 160 laps. Um, so performance points really aren't key, and that's why our normal guys that would have a high impact score don't necessarily have that same impact score. There's not a ton of points. There's 112 points. Stages are 50-50 for the first two stages and 60 on the last stage. I haven't seen anything official, but I'm pretty sure there will also be a comp caution. I'm guessing around lap
It's
10,
lap 20.
lap 20. Okay, there we go. Um, and the last time we were here, I guess you had Denny Hamlin up on the board. Was that last summer? Or
Yeah,
no,
I
that
believe
was
so.
William Byron. So actually,
No,
the last
no,
time
that
we
was
were here,
William Byron last time, or Denny Hamlin was.
McDowell won earlier this year. So we need to update that a little bit on our race guide. But uh, this is a fun race. Daytona is for the drivers. It is an equalizer. We talked about it in the podcast. Any Virtually anybody can win. I mean, this field's got 40 cars. I would say 30 of them legitimately have a chance to win. I think there's a couple that could actually help you win money from DraftKings. I don't see them winning, like a David Starr or something like that. I don't think they have a winning car, but they could be in position to put you in a winning situation on the DK slate. But this is one of our favorite races. But like I said, Joe, I think you got a little explaining to do before we get too far into this because uh, I always like to do my impact score separate from you. I saw after I put mine in that you had already done them, so I didn't have that influence me. And I was quite surprised by some of the numbers that you put on some of these people after what we talked about. So I feel like this is going to be one of those weeks where I'm curious what you guys think, where you're landing on. if you're kind of liking how I'm rating some of these guys or how Joe's doing it, because we've never been more different. I expected us to be different. It is a super speedway race, but there is some differences. Up top, we're about the same. So once we get past some of these guys, like, well, really, once we get to Kyle Busch, I think that's the first huge difference. So let's get into Joey Logano. He starts at the top of the slate. He's 10-6. He starts 22nd. We both give him eights. Kind of explain why you're giving him an eight this week, Joe.
Yeah, we talked about it in the podcast. He's a good super speedway racer. Again, I don't. This week, the strategy is the key. I think that's where a lot of our time was spent in the podcast talking about optimals and how you want that stack the back approach. That starting position really is key in the makeup of lineups this week, obviously. Um, and the optimal lineup data that we dove into in our garage thoughts portion, I think, really helps you kind of strategically figure out who you want and why you want certain guys in different starting positions. And with Joey Logano starting 22nd, to me, he finds himself in that kind of stack the back approach, but he's got a bigger price tag. But there's so much value to be had when we get down lower this week because those guys are starting it further in the back, and we do expect a lot of accidents where these guys have the opportunity to really finish strongly, and because it is drafting, there's a lot of drafting this week that factors into it. So to me, Joey Logano, getting back to him, I think 22nd is a pretty strong starting position for that price tag. I add an 8 because I think his, like we were talking about, his super speedway talents are really strong. So I'm looking for him to have a decent showing.
Yeah, I think the Logano, he's kind of a really like a top five guy or on the hook guy. That's kind of what you get out of him with this 22nd starting spot. If he's able to finish this race, he's likely to be in the top 10 and possibly contending for that win, top five, top three. He was in third in the 500, or actually second, and then Brad got into him, and or no, I think he was leading actually. He was leading. Brad got into him. That's how McDowell won. So he's no stranger to being up front at these kind of things. He ended up on his roof at Dega, so that's why I kind of say he's kind of going to finish high or he's going to be on the hook. That's what we get out of Logano. I'm an 8. I'm going to move on down to Austin Dillon. He's 10,300. Starts 27th. We documented in our podcast just how just his situation. He can still get in on points, but I don't think that that's what you want to do. If you're that team, I think you just got to say we're going for the win. I mean, if we know we're in for sure because Reddick's already out and we've had enough stage points, okay. But I think you just got to go for it. I'm at an 8. I don't have him at a 9 like you do, mostly because he's probably going to be one of the highest owned drivers on the slate. So I was going to bump down his impact score for me just a little bit. I think you can potentially get off of him and still be fine. But obviously, I feel like that's a pretty safe starting position for him. He's really good at these types of tracks. He's in a situation where he needs to perform well. So I understand the 9, but that's the reason why I'm a little lower on Dillon. It's purely an ownership uh, deduction for me.
Yeah, I've given him a 9. I think he's just got strong. He really needs to have a strong performance this week to be able to further his cause for the playoffs. Obviously, this is last week, so I'm looking for him to be able to hold true to what he needs to happen. And he's a great plate racer. I just can't miss the boat on him. I know he's probably going to be heavily owned. I completely see your opinion, and it's valid. So Brad Keselowski, 10,000 starting 10th is next. I think he's somebody that you could look to because he is a really good super speedway racer. We talked about him in the podcast to an extent. So I've landed on a 6 because I think you can go there and find a little difference. He's in those optimals that we talked about. There's a couple guys that have started in the top 10 that have hit in these optimals. So he's one of those guys I think fits to the mold that you can potentially rely on. We've seen him up at the front late in the races here recently at super speedway. So That's why I landed at a 6. He's risky.
I'm at a 5. I think it's a 50-50 play. He's a coin flip. I think he can do well, but if he's going to be in the optimal, he's obviously going to need to get some laps led, which is possible. He is a talent. I think he has 6 super speedway victories overall. So he's no stranger to winning these things. It's just how much can he get up front for that price at his starting position. It's a coin flip for me. It's kind of a coin flip for the next guy, Kevin Harvick, 9,800. I see we're the same. We're both at a 5s. He's got good history as far as like average finish here recently and even long term. He's not a terrible super speedway racer, but he's definitely not a guy that we think of when we go to tracks like these. Um, that could work in your favor. I think he might be lower owned. I think he could be worth the risk. Starting 11th. He's There's a little upside there, but I think if you play him, it's more of the lower ownership play, and that could pay off. But again, it's kind of a coin flip for me.
Yeah, I'm at a 5 as well. A coin flip. I think everything you just touched on is going to relate to a lot of these drivers that we're about to talk about, honestly. Because Alex Bowman, 9,600, starting 15th. I'm at a 6. I see he has a little bit more upside, in my opinion, than Kevin Harvick because of the starting position. That's why I've given him a 6, which is a 1 up from Harvick.
I'm at a 6 as well. Kind of same thing. It's more of just, hey, there's a little bit more PD upside there. He's in a Hendrick car. Hendricks, they're just good on super speedways as far as speed. We're in a 450 reduced, horsepower engine now. They got more of a taper spacer on there. They're moving a wicker bill, whatever the heck that's supposed to do. I mean, they're doing all sorts of different things to these cars to, I guess, not get them to flip. To me, if you slow them down, they're only going to be more bunched up, which means they're just as likely to flip. So I don't know what we're going to see quite from that, but I would expect Hendrick still to have an edge in horsepower on these motors. So that's why I'm kind of at a 6 as well on Bowman. We come on down to Denny Hamlin, 9,400. He starts third. We're both at 7s. I don't think I have anyone else starting, around this same position rated this high. And it's just because if we're just being honest, Hamlin right now is the best super speedway driver that we have on the circuit. There's some good ones, Logano, Brad. There's a few other ones as well, but Hamlin by far is just when you just listen to the pod, he's got good stats. Go to the garage stats, look at his stats. I mean, he's really good. He has very few races where he doesn't finish inside the top 10. I'm not higher just because he's starting third, so even if he gets a top 3, there's very little PD upside. I don't know with this reduced horsepower if he's going to be able to stay out front and lead, or if it's going to be that type of race. So that's why I got to bump him down to 7. But hey, he's right now the best super speedway driver.
Yeah, I'm at a 7, ditto to what you said. He's there. Everything that you look at once you want to play him, you want to have exposure. I wouldn't go heavy because of the risk that's associated. There's not a lot of place differential, and we've talked about in the podcast how there's not a lot of performance points available in this style of racing. So Eric Almirola, 9,300, starting 19th, is somebody that you might look at and feel a little bit more confident because of his starting position being 19th. I've given him a 7. I see that you landed at a 7 as well. What are your thoughts on Eric Almirola? Or is he just kind of a filler this week for you?
I mean, he's in a decent spot, and I'm sure he'll carry some ownership. I mean, until a couple of weeks ago at New Hampshire, the only places he had gotten any victories at was on super speedways. He seems to be towards the front late in races. He might still wreck out and have a bad finish, but when you're watching these races live or on TV, whatever, you're gonna typically see Amarola towards the front at some point in the race, and very often it's late in the race. So for that, if he's able to avoid any wrecks, starting 19th, he's got great PD upside. He doesn't need to win; he's already in the playoffs. But that team has had a terrible season. If they can get an extra 5 points or maybe get a stage win or something like that, that would be huge if they're gonna move to the round of 12, which I feel like they'll probably be eliminated that first round. So they have something to race for too. That's why I'm at a 7. But now we get to the point where you have to, well, we have to kind of, I guess, explain our differences. So typically, if we don't end up landing on the same number or close to it, like we're usually off by one. Just we've already seen it so far. Kyle Busch comes up next. He's 9,200. He starts fourth. I gave him a 3 because of everything we talked about in the pod. You don't have as much opportunity to get those extra points to make the optimal. There's really no PD upside. So I gave him a 3. I mean, you can play him. He's going to be likely low owned. He's a good super speedway driver, but just mathematically, it's like there's not a ton of reason to play him. But you gave him a 7. So how are we different by 4 here?
I'm looking at it as there's going to be a lot of opportunities to be different this week, and I use these opportunities to play in big GPP entries. You seem sometimes to go a little bit lighter on these types of races because there's so much unknown and all that type of stuff. So to me, this is where I typically take risks, and sometimes, often, not often, but I've had it happen enough that it pays for the whole season and sometimes the following season of entry. So right now, I'm looking at Kyle Busch as one of those guys that you just gave uh, Denny Hamlin a 7 and talked about all these great things. But right now, I feel Kyle Busch is in a great spot this week. He's cheaper than Denny Hamlin, starting fourth. And he has all the winning upside that you just got done explaining about Denny Hamlin. I think that you could be different in GPP. And no way am I saying, hey, this is your guy for stack the back approach in cash games and things along those lines. To me, this week's purely GPP. There is no cash. If you look at our race guide, we don't have any cash. So some of these drivers here, I think, are the guys that are going to allow you to be different, because if he hits on leading a couple laps, getting a couple fastest laps, and wins the race, he's already at 6 something X at that point. And if you've got him with the right guys in the back, or stacked with a Joey Logano, Austin Dillon, or something along those lines, you're going to hit a home run. So I want some exposure to him and a couple of these other guys that I'm not saying roster all the time, but they can have huge impacts on this race and allow you to be different.
So I can accept that. I mean, I understand that. I mean, it's a good point between Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch, although Kyle Busch has not had the success Hamlin's had. Um, had decent runs for sure, but has definitely been on more hooks than Hamlin has. So I can get that. But it's not just Kyle Busch that I'm seeing here, because we go down to Kyle Larson. He's 9,000.
Yep.
He starts first. There is zero PD upside. And unless I overlooked it, I don't believe anybody starting first or probably even starting second has made an optimal in recent years. I gave Larson a 2. It's not that I don't like Larson. It's not even that I think Larson couldn't possibly win. I don't see how he's that guy that really, if you have all the other pieces in place, I don't see how he's the guy that pushes you over the edge and gives you serious wins. I'm at a 2, but yet you're at a 6.
Yeah, because also we don't know how this package is going to ultimately play out. We have a great idea, we think, but can he, being at the front of this, dominate this race? We've seen weird things happen this year. This is a weird year. I'm thinking something could along those lines happen where we see a little bit of a weirder get in line kind of a race where he could potentially stack. I'm not saying, hey, I think that's how it ultimately plays out. I'm saying it could. I think that giving him a 6, maybe it's a little strong. Maybe a 5 would be more in line. But I'm not saying, again, to use him as like a building block. I think he's somebody in GPP tournaments that will be very, very underowned, because a lot of people this week are doing exactly what you're doing and everybody else. And me being different and contrarian, will be able to fit him in on a couple lineups where I think it makes sense, and hopefully it hits a home run for me. So I'm not saying to go heavy by any means on him or Kyle Busch or a couple of these other drivers like a Ryan Blaney or Martin Truex or Chase Elliott, but they all can be interchangeable in this same position and scenario.
Okay, interesting. So does that mean that you think that there won't be a big one if we've been seeing wacky things, or are we going to miss a big one on Saturday night?
No, I think we still get the big one. I think we still see an accident, but it's still, you're going to put a Kyle Larson with all these other guys, and he's going to have a huge impact on the race if he wins and it goes the way we just kind of got done explaining. I'm not saying that that's the way it what plays out, but we've seen wacky things happen, especially this season.
Okay, all righty. Let's get on down to Kaz Grala next. There's a lot of guys that we need to talk about, and we're trying to keep this short and sweet. Kaz Grala, likely to be the highest owned driver. Don't think there's need to be much said about him. He's 8,900. He starts 38th. We're both at nines. He's likely to have a good race. If he ends up wrecking out, he's not going to get you like negative points. Like it's a safe of a play as you can get. He's in a good car. Is there anything specific you want to say about Kaz Grala before we talk about Blaney?
Now he's stacked the back. He's going to be one of the key building blocks for that for a lot of people, I think, this week.
So that brings us to Blaney. Great super speedway driver. He's 8,800. He starts sixth. He just won Michigan, which kind of played out a little bit like a super speedway. Ultimately, I gave him a 3. I kind of sure why you gave him a 6. I can kind of figure it out. But I'm going to say just, hey, typically we don't see these guys at the front make it. I think over the last 5 Daytona races, only 2 drivers from the top 10 have made the optimal. Only 2 drivers from 11th to 20th made the optimal. So it's very rare and very hard to pinpoint exactly which drivers are going to do it. I could see Blaney being that guy, but ultimately there's not a lot of upside. I'm at a 3.
Yeah, I landed on a 6 because just kind of the copy and paste job for the other guys we just got done talking about. I think him, Martin Truex, who's next at 8,700, starting 7th. To me, they're interchangeable in the way that I'm approaching it this week. I think Chase Elliott, 8,500, starting 5th, is somebody too that is in that same mix. He's even more up on your radar, it looks like, as well. So if you want to go off of on a little bit Martin Truex and Chase Elliott, what you're expecting this week.
Well, it's Martin Truex just typically just does not do. He always finds himself in the wrecks. Even if he has times where he's looking good, he still seems to get swept up in the wrecks. Um, his stats aren't that impressive. So for me, it's just kind of one of those like you risk it. I just don't think it's going to happen. But Elliott in a Hendrick car, um, a winner at Talladega a few years ago, finished second on the 500 earlier. Was really, had the caution not come out, I think he was actually going to pass McDowell and win that race. I'm actually a little surprised that NASCAR didn't award him the win, but they said the timing, McDowell was ahead, but Elliott was right there in position. He looked good. They've been fast all year. So for me, I'm going to give him a 6. I see you're at a 7. I'm guessing similar strategy, but that's why, starting 5th, I'm going to be just a little higher on him, but it's just because of the recent performance on these styles of tracks. We get down to Christopher Bell, 8,300. He starts 14th, pretty solid. I mean, we don't have a lot of data on Cup, but I mean, he's just a good driver overall. At the 14th starting position, there's a lot of upside. There's also a lot of downside. He's right there in sort of that mid pack, the upper mid pack. He's a coin flip for me. I'm at a 5.
Yeah, I'm at a 7. I think he's being there at 14th. I can see why you're at a coin flip, but I think he's one of those drivers that has a little bit better equipment. And if he plays his cards right, misses the big one, fades back with his teammates that we've seen Toyota do throughout the years, he could survive that and have a top 5 and have a really strong day. So he could be somebody that goes a little overlooked, but that's why I'm at a 7. I think he's a great GPP play.
All right, so we get to an interesting play, likely to be highly owned. 8,200, starting 29th is Mr. Chastain. It's been had some rough races the last few weeks, but stats-wise, he's pretty good. Here's going to be one of the big difference. Normally, when he has those good finishes, those high DK point totals, all that, he was in poor equipment, so riding around towards the back and just passing people that ended up on the record, right? He's actually going to have a fast car. He's going to be trying to win this race because that's his only way into the playoffs. I'm going to be in an 8. I see you're at a 9. He starts 29, so that's the move. That's the stack the back sort of strategy. I'm guessing the reason why I'm a little lower is, or why I'm going to say I'm lower, is his aggression. It can work for him and it can work against him. I see him ultimately having a good day for us from a DraftKings perspective, but I can also see him getting into trouble because he's trying to do too much or to do too much at the wrong time and ends up in the big one.
I could see a scenario where that happens. I could see a scenario where that happens for a lot of these drivers, but ultimately with the way that he is set up this week, I think a 9 in my opinion is where he's going to land because he's one of those drivers that does have a little bit better equipment than he's ever had. So I think with his ability to get around these super speedway tracks at this point in a little bit better equipment, it could be a really strong day for him if he stays out of the mess. So I see where you're coming from, but also I see the upside that he has and a strong path to value there starting 29th.
So William Byron is next. He's 8,000. He starts second. He won this race last year. He locked himself in the playoffs by winning this race last year. He is pretty good on super speedways. His data is not bad. He's certainly playable. I'm going to be at a coin flip, and the reason why I'm kind of giving him more of a coin flip versus some of the other guys that we've already talked about, like the Kyle Bushes and whatnot, even though salary doesn't matter this week, because you're going to be playing a lot of the cheaper guys as we talk about them, it's still one of those things where, Kyle Busch is 9,200, William Byron is 8,000. To me, William Byron, as of late, has been a better plate racer. I would rather play that and then maybe pay up for both Logano and Dillon in that kind of lineup. That's how I would approach it. So for me, he's a coin flip. I'm at 5. You're at a 6. Unless there's anything specific you want to say about Byron, I say we talk about Suarez because I gave him a 7. He starts 26. He's 7,800. I gave him a 7. I think he's worth playing. He fits the stack to back mold, but ultimately, because I recognize the upside and the car, but he has just seems to always get caught up in something because I don't think he has any top 20s, or at least recently, on these super speedways. So to me, he's kind of a dangerous play. Are you comfortable rostering Suarez this week?
Yeah, I've given him an 8. I think we've seen a little bit of a downslide. A lot of people probably have bad tastes in their mouth here recently. You might be able to sneak a little bit lower ownership because he's $7,800. There's a lot of guys under that price tag that have a lot better starting positions for the stack the back approach. So I think him, Ryan Preece, 7,700 starting 24. He's someone in a very similar situation. I've given him an 8 as well because I think him and Suarez are almost interchangeable this week. Preece actually is very strong, has great numbers at super speedways.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly about Priest. I gave him a 7 as well, so I rated him and Suarez the same. But realistically, if it's coming down between those two, or if I'm building my lineup and I'm looking at those two, I'm going Priest all day over Suarez. But the reason why they're the same in my book is because Suarez has a slightly higher PD upside because he starts a little further back. But personally, I would rather play Priest, a guy I don't know necessarily what to do with this guy because he kind of fits a contrarian narrative. Kurt Busch, 7,600. He starts 8th. He's been in a lot of situations already like this where he's kind of in that place where we don't want to play him because we don't see a ton of upside, place differential wise. But then he'll come out and he'll have heck of a runs. I got to give him a 4 because of the starting position and just because of how Daytona is. Is he a guy that you're going to try to put in your lineups just to be contrarian, or are you just going to kind of ultimately fade Kurt Busch this week?
I've given him a 6 because I do want just a couple lineups with him in it because I've seen him be all optimal in these kind of situations this year already. So I think that's enough for me to want to have just enough exposure to him. But I'm not going heavy this week. He fits my Nick Contrarian narrative this week for sure.
So I think uh, possibly the strongest play on one of the strongest plays, top five strongest plays on the slate is going to be Corey LaJoy, likely to be highly owned as well. 7,400 starts 33rd. We're both at nines. You're going to start seeing some more of these higher scores because a lot of the guys we're about to talk about, they're starting in the back. But Corey LaJoy, he's a guy who somehow, some way, consistently finds himself in the top 10 late. He's good at passing wrecked cars, not so good when they're still on the track. So I think this is a week that LaJoy will be highly owned, but it comes like, I mean, it's warranted, you know?
Yeah, I've given him a 9. I think I've seen some people put some stats out there that aren't that kind to him on super speedways, but he's been caught up in a lot of bad accidents as well, just like everybody. So those stats can be skewed. So I don't look at that. I look at his equipment. It's a little bit better than what he's had in years past. It's fast enough to get the win. We've seen Justin Haley win in a rain delay with this equipment. So I think he's going to be somebody that you could look to if he's able to survive, just like all these other drivers.
All right, so let's try to skim through some of these guys now. There's not much to say about Landon Castle. 7,100, he starts 39th. Play him. Find a way to get him in some of your lineups. You don't have to go 100%. We're both at nines. He's been really solid about on super speedways. I think he's making his like 500th Cup start. He's been out for a little while. Solid play. Newman, the Newminator, he's next on the board. 7,000. Starts 23rd. I'm at a 7. You're at a 9. I'll let you kind of say quickly what you think about Newman, but for me, he's another guy who kind of tends to find himself up front late in the race, but he's very aggressive about blocking. If this race becomes more of a blocking race because of the horsepower, you know, reduction, if it's about blocking, he's obviously going to be good, but that means he's probably going to get dumped. That's how we saw him really get in that bad accident 2 Daytona 500s ago, or not the most recent one, but the last one, whatever. That's why I'm going to give him a 7 because he does seem to kind of also get in the big ones here. So, are you thinking he's just going to avoid that this year?
That's what I'm hoping on. I'm looking at him and Cole Custer, the next guy on the list, 6,800, starting 25th. Those two guys to me are interchangeable. I've given them both nines. You've got valid points. Newman's had great runs, just hasn't had some of the finishes. But if he gets that finish where he's at, it fits a great path to value along with Cole Custer. That's why I've given him as a 9 as well.
Yeah, I'm at a 7 on Cole Custer. I think he's certainly playable. I, he's got to find a way to win this race too. I mean, if I were them, I'd probably kind of hang out towards the rear until late in the race. You're not getting in on points, so why risk it early? Now we get into some really interesting plays. Matty D comes up next. He's 6,700. He starts ninth. I'm going to be at a 6 because I know he's going to have to do some stuff to try to win this race. We've seen him up front. I mean, he was in position to win Talladega. He wins that race. Obviously, this is a completely different race for them. He's got to win. I would imagine they're going to be, as aggressive as possible. That makes me a little nervous with that ninth starting position to say, yeah, he's a danger, but he really is a danger to potentially win this race. 6,700. If he gets a top 3, that's going to be a solid value for you. But again, there's that risk of negative place differential.
Yeah, I landed at an 8 because I think he has just as good as an opportunity as anybody else to win this, and he needs to win this for his career. So I'm putting a little bit more pressure on Matty D this week than I think I have ever. Honestly, I think he is in a interesting position starting ninth that he can reach value if he has a strong performance. Obviously, there's a lot of risk there, but yeah, I've landed at an 8. I think he's an interesting play this week.
If he can win this race, this might secure him a cup ride next year. If he's not able to do it and doesn't find a way to get a win in the playoffs, in one of the playoff races. I don't know if we see Matty D in Cup Series next year, and if we do, it might be on a pretty poor team if he decides to do that. We might see him go back Xfinity, something like that. Big race for uh, Matty D and that whole 21 team. But Bubba Wallace is next, 6,500. This is a huge race for this team. He starts 20th. I'm at a 7, and I see you're at a 9. So I already kind of know where you're going to come from. He's been really. This team needs to get a win, obviously. They had high expectations. I would say, undershot those for the most part this year. He's had a couple good races, but for the most part, that team has just under delivered on most expectations. Bubba's had some really good runs at Daytona and just super speedways in general. I think in the last 6, he's got the 8th best overall driver rating. I mean, he's pretty solid. But if I'm being honest, the last few races, especially in like this year on super speedways, and the reason why Bubba Wallace should win this race, but probably won't win this race, he drives like an asshole on these tracks. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. He will find a guy, he'll tail him, he'll push him up towards the front, and the millisecond he has a chance to get off of him and potentially advance his position, he moves it, and almost every single time it seems like he ends up going back 10 spots. And unless he can fix that this week and get some good help from his Toyota teammates, I think this is a race where Bubba Wallace will let down his fan base because he doesn't seem to want to work with people very long. And I think late in the race, everyone remembers that, and then no one wants to help him late in the race because they know what's going to happen. They know that they're going to get dumped late in the race. Do you see it any
Well,
differently?
we'll have to see how it plays out. I'm at a 9. I think he's in a great spot. He has to win. I think there's a lot there for him to have learned, and he's got great teammates and we've seen Toyota strategy in years past. I think he's able to survive this and gets a strong finish. To me, I see great value with him and Eric Jones, 6,300, starting 21st at his old ride. They're doing dueling paint schemes this week, starting 20th and 21st. It's going to be cool to see how they fall. I've given Eric Jones a 9. He's somebody that's really good at super speedway races as well. So I like both of these guys. They're interchangeable. I will have exposure to both of them strongly this week.
Yeah, I'm gonna 8 on Eric Jones as well. And just to kind of finish up, I'll still probably have a singles bet on Bubba to win. I'm sure he's gonna have decent odds. Um, like I said, he should win this race. I think everything is kind of lined up for him. No other Toyotas are trying to get in the playoffs. They're all locked in. They should all help him. I would think that Hamlin's going to try to help him too. I'm just saying, based on what I've seen, we'll see how it plays out because he needs to fix that quickly if he's going to advance. David Starr, I mean, he starts 40th at 6,200. He cannot fall backwards. My biggest concern with David Starr is his car may not make it late enough in the race to be able to pass cars that wreck. So it all depends on when the big one happens to me. So I'm going to give him a 7 because when you start 40th, you literally can only move up or stay the same. There's no going backwards. So anything that you wanted to add about David Starr before we talk about Ricky?
I've given him a 7 as well. Saying his equipment is the only thing that's keeping me from going higher on him.
So I said it kind of in the podcast. I think Ricky might be the guy that actually sneaks this one out and backdoors his way into the playoffs. Um, Starting 12th at 6,000, obviously price isn't going to really matter. Kind of surprised he's that low, to be honest. There's some PD upside there. His aggression will probably be what screws him in the end. I'm going to be at a 6, but I see you're kind of selling out on almost everybody from here on out.
Yeah, I think he's in an interesting spot. $6,000, way cheaper than I thought he would be. I've given him a 9. I think he's somebody that has the ability to get the job done and win here. He's interesting because everybody else below here, except for 1 or 2 drivers, are strictly stacked the back. So he could I don't think he goes overlooked. A lot of people like him in situations where it's super speedway racing, so he's somebody to strategically place in GPP tournaments this week.
So I'm going to talk about kind of the next three guys together, just kind of conserve a little time, where they got the same rating from both of us. Anthony Alfredo, 5,800. He starts 32nd. Michael McDowell, he's 5,700. He starts 18th. Justin Haley, he's 5,500. He starts 28th. I'm at an 8 on all three of those guys. You're at a 9 on all three of those guys. If I'm picking one, ooh, I think McDowell is obviously the most likely to win. I mean, he just won Daytona and he had a really good running at Talladega. But I think playing Alfredo and Justin Haley together, or that's kind of a move, because I feel like those guys, I don't think they're going to be up in the mix to do much until some of these a little bit faster cars wreck out, and then that's when they come in and earn you all your points. Do you see it any differently?
No, that's pretty much how I view it as well. I've given them 9s because I think they all fit well into the way we're approaching it this week. I think it's going to be interesting to see which one of those guys, if any of them, are able to survive this thing.
Chase Briscoe, he's 5,300. He starts 16th. I think this is a nice pivot on ownership. I don't expect him to be highly owned. They're another team that needs to win. They couldn't get it done on the road course. I'm going to be at a 6 just because, again, there's more places for him to potentially lose than gain. But I don't think, like, if you decided to go Briscoe, even in a couple lineups, I wouldn't fault you for it.
Yeah, I'm viewing him and Chris Buescher, 5,200, starting 13th, as very similar plays. They're interchangeable in my eyes. I've given them both 9s because really they're not the typical mold of stack the back, but their price tags are so cheap that it won't take a lot for them to reach a strong value point if we see a couple accidents, which we're all expecting, and they're the ones that are able to survive it. So I want both of these guys, and again, my way I'm approaching it this week, and my contrarian approach. Joey Gase, 5,000, man, 37th. Him and Balicki, 4,900, starting 32nd or 36th. They're interchangeable in my eyes this week. I think they're going to be guys that are going to be heavily rostered because of the the back approach. I've given Gase a 9 and Balicki an 8. You viewing them very similarly, giving them both 8s, huh?
So we're at the point now where these are all punt plays. These are the classic punt plays. These guys are almost always below 5,000 or just right around that 5,000 or less. These are guys that you're just going to find ways into your lineups. You kind of choose who you want. I don't see any of these guys potentially winning this race. It's not even close. I think a wrecked top tier car would probably beat one of their cars, but a top 15 from some of these guys, top 20, top 15, that's massive points. They completely open up the whole board for you. Find ways to sprinkle them in. I'm at, you said, an 8 for those two. Garrett Smithley, Cody Warrick, we're both at 7s. Solid plays. Quinn Houff, I'd probably be the highest on. He starts 35th. He's 4,600. You're at an 8, and then McLeod, we just flipped those scores around. I'm at an 8. You're at a 9. That's kind of how I'm looking at these. I'm just going to find ways to find these cheap guys, plug them in there, hope for some big wrecks. But you're going to have to get different. I mean, they're going to be highly owned, or they should be. I think we're going to define the differences where we had our differences in our score. That's where you're going to have to look at it. I'm curious to see what you guys out there think. Whose scores do you like more? Because we were very different, and I'd be kind of curious to see what you guys think.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be really exciting, but we've taken up enough of your time. Go make those lineups, hit that subscribe button. It helps us out. Thanks so much for watching. Take advantage of those early entry contests as well, and drop your DK tag below so we can invite you to our weekly contest. But yeah, I don't have much to add to it. Let's get this thing rolling. For the DK Garage, I'm Joe, and that's Jeremy, and we'll see you next time.